My mom slapped me and kicked me out at 18 for refusing an arranged marriage. 11 years later, I landed in a private jet with her granddaughter. My name is Brooklyn Mason, and I turned 18 a week ago. I live in Georgetown, and while most people think it's a charming little town full of Southern grace and family values, my life at home feels more like a stage play where everything must look perfect, no matter the cost. From the moment I could remember, my mother Veronica made it very clear that my role in our family was to be the poised, silent reflection of her ambition. Every step I took had to fit the image she curated, an image of elegance, status, and obedience. My mother didn't raise me so much as she managed me, like a project. She picked my outfits down to the earrings, scheduled my tutoring, enrolled me in etiquette classes when I was 10, and told me which friends were acceptable and which weren't. Her voice carried the final word in every discussion, and when she didn't get her way, her silence was even more terrifying than her anger. My father Thomas, he was a shadow in our house, a man whose presence was muted by years of passive compliance. He never challenged her, never interrupted, never said no, especially when it came to decisions about me. The biggest decision of all, the one I never got a say in, was David Sutton, 33 years old, heir to Sutton Construction, a company that paved half the city and lined the pockets of every council member in town. The kind of man who doesn't smile unless there's a camera, doesn't speak unless it's strategic. My mother had been grooming me for him since I was 15. At first, it was just passing compliments. David's such a respectable young man, don't you think? Then came the dinners, then the luncheons, and eventually, the expectation that I would be his wife. Not someday soon. This week, my mother has been planning the engagement dinner like it's the royal wedding. Every minute of every day is consumed with calls to florists, caterers, musicians. She's turned our house into a shrine of glassware and seating charts. And while she's directing everything with her usual ironclad precision, I'm being fitted into a custom-made gown like a mannequin. It's not that David is cruel. That might be easier. He's just indifferent. He looks at me like I'm a business merger, a neat, beneficial arrangement that'll keep his family's legacy spotless and give him a wife who knows how to smile politely and stay quiet. He doesn't ask me about school, doesn't know I like to sketch when I'm alone, doesn't realize I still sleep with the window cracked just to hear something real at night. The dinner is tonight. The chandelier above our dining room table has been polished so hard I can see my reflection in every crystal. Veronica rehearsed her speech this morning, standing in front of the mirror like a politician. Brooklyn and David represent the union of two long-standing traditions, she began, smiling with practiced warmth. I stood behind her, still in my pajamas, heart pounding. Every word she spoke felt like a nail in the coffin of the life I thought I might have. There's no one I can talk to about this. My friends from school don't know, and I don't dare say anything that might reach the wrong ears. My dad won't help. I tried once, last summer. I asked him what he thought about the engagement, not if he liked David, but if he thought I should marry someone I didn't love. He didn't even look up from his newspaper. Just mumbled, "Your mother knows what she's doing." That was the end of it. I've learned to keep my rebellion small, quiet. I sketch in secret, drawings of girls running through woods, climbing fire escapes, smiling with wind in their hair. Sometimes, late at night, I whisper names into the dark. Names of cities I've never been to but dream about. Portland, Montreal, Venice. Places where no one knows me, and I can be whoever I want. Not Brooklyn Mason, the pretty daughter of Veronica, not the soon-to-be Mrs. Sutton, but someone real. But those dreams feel like fog this evening. The house is filled with the scent of roasted rosemary lamb and clinking glasses. Guests are arriving in sleek cars, women in pearls and men in tailored suits. And I'm sitting upstairs in a dress I didn't choose, in heels that pinch, knowing that any moment now, I'll be called down to stand beside a man I barely know, to smile like it's the happiest night of my life. I want to scream, but all I can do is breathe, slowly, trying not to ruin my makeup, trying not to cry, because Veronica made it very clear, no tears tonight. This is the night everything becomes official. The night the world sees us not just as families, but as one. And me? I'm the price of that union. The quiet, elegant ribbon tying the deal together. It started with a stolen moment and a shaky hand. I sat at the library computer one afternoon, pretending to research for a history paper while my heart pounded so hard I could barely hear the keyboard under my fingers. I knew exactly what I was doing. I had memorized the application page weeks before, every section like a lifeline. University of California, Los Angeles. The place I had read about late at night on my phone under the covers, where no one cared if your mother was the president of the PDA or if your family name bought half the town. I told myself it was just a fantasy, but in that moment, I let myself believe it could be real. I filled out the forms. I wrote the essay with trembling fingers. I didn't ask for letters of recommendation. I stole them from past teachers' email replies, ones my mother had intercepted and never followed up on. I paid the fee using a prepaid Visa card I bought with cash I had saved from selling sketches to classmates. No one knew, not even my reflection in the mirror. Weeks passed. I acted the part. I smiled at dinners, nodded at David's every dull remark, let my mother pick out napkin colors like they were sacred relics. And then one afternoon, just before the engagement dinner, I came home and found the envelope. A thick, official-looking package wedged between the fashion catalogs and utility bills. My name, my address. My heartbeat stuttered. I didn't open it right away. I took it to my room, locked the door, sat on my bed for 15 minutes just staring at it. When I finally tore it open and read the words, "We are pleased to offer you admission," I felt something in my chest crack open, like breathing for the first time. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just sat there, calm and still, as the house buzzed around me with preparations for a life I no longer intended to live. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in the sketchbook under my bed, and zipped my mouth shut like always. But now there was a current under everything I did, a secret tide pulling me forward. The dinner was exactly what you'd expect from a woman like Veronica Mason. Candlelight flickered off crystal glassware, the silver was polished like a mirror, and a string quartet played softly in the background, as if real emotion might ruin the ambience. David sat beside me, smiling like a CEO closing a merger. My dress was tight, my smile tighter, and everything around me felt like the world's most beautiful cage. When the time came, he stood, cleared his throat, and everyone turned toward us. My mother beamed, her hands clasped like a queen watching a coronation. David said the words. I don't remember them all. Something about partnership and legacy, and then he knelt. Opened a box. Inside was a ring that looked like it belonged in a museum, cold and precise. Everyone clapped. My mother wiped a fake tear. I felt the walls press in. I stood up. I didn't mean to. I just did. My chair scraped loudly against the floor, cutting through the polite applause. The silence after was sharp. I didn't look at David. I turned and walked out onto the back porch, my heels clicking like gunshots on the tile. The air outside was thick and warm. I leaned against the railing and took a breath that tasted like freedom and fear. He followed me, of course. David, all concern and confusion, asking if I was okay, if I needed water. I turned to him and said quietly, I'm not going to marry you. His face didn't change at first, like he hadn't quite processed it. I said it again, louder this time, and added, I never wanted this. Any of this. The doors opened behind us. My mother's voice cut through the night, sharp and thin. Brooklyn, she said, like my name was a warning. I turned to her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. I told her everything. That I had applied to UCLA, that I had been accepted, that I was leaving, that I would not live my life as some porcelain doll for her to parade around. I said I was done pretending, that I wouldn't sit quietly while she bartered my future away like a family heirloom. Her face twisted in a way I had never seen before. There were no guests here now, no performance, just fury and disbelief. And then she slapped me. Hard. The sound echoed off the porch walls, and for a second, the world stopped. I tasted blood. My hand went to my cheek, and I looked at her, really looked, and saw her for what she was, a woman more obsessed with image than love, more invested in control than care. Get out, she said through clenched teeth. You're no daughter of mine. I didn't say anything. I turned, walked inside past the stunned guests, picked up my purse, and left. Just like that. No packed bag. No plan. Just the weight of the letter in my sketchbook and the ring of her hand on my face. I walked away from everything I had ever known with a single backpack slung over my shoulder and exactly $300 tucked in an envelope my father had handed me when no one was looking. He didn't say a word, just pressed the envelope into my palm with a quiet, almost guilty nod, as if he was trying to apologize without speaking. That money was all I had, and it was more than I expected. It wasn't love, not really, but it was something. And when you've been told you're no daughter anymore, something is everything. I didn't know where I was going when I stepped off our porch that night. I just kept walking. For hours. Past the glowing windows of houses where people were probably laughing over dinner, through quiet streets that smelled like honeysuckle and lawn clippings, until my feet hurt and my heart felt numb. Eventually, I ended up at a gas station where I sat on the curb and scrolled through my contacts. Most people I knew were from my mother's carefully curated circle, girls with parents like hers, girls who would look at me with polite concern and then call their mothers the second I hung up. But then I saw Casey's name. We hadn't spoken in months, not really, not since she drifted out of the social bubble my mom had tried to trap me in. Casey lived in a part of town my mother used to refer to as humble, which was her way of saying not good enough. But I remembered sleepovers at Casey's house, the way her parents hugged her when she walked through the door, the way dinner always came with laughter, not performance. I called her, voice shaking, not even sure what I'd say if she picked up. But she did. And when she heard my voice, she didn't ask questions. She just said, "Come over." Now, her family lived in a one-story house that smelled like garlic and warm bread. Her mom wore an oversized sweater and her dad had paint on his hands from a kitchen project. When I stepped inside, something cracked open in me. Not because it was fancy, it wasn't. The couch was old, the walls were cluttered with mismatched frames, and a ceiling fan wobbled a little when it spun. But it felt like home. Real home. Not the polished illusion I had grown up with. Casey didn't treat me like a fallen princess or a charity case. She handed me a blanket, gave me the couch, and told me I could stay as long as I needed. The next morning, I woke up early and registered for UCLA with shaky fingers, using the school's emergency housing list to find a last-minute spot in a rundown shared dorm. I packed up my things, really just a few clothes, my sketchbook, and that envelope from my dad, and said goodbye to Casey's family with a promise to visit. They hugged me like I was part of their world, not some burden. I cried in the car. College wasn't a movie. It didn't magically fix everything. My dorm was cramped, the mattress felt like cardboard, and my roommate chewed gum like it owed her money. But it was mine. The freedom felt raw, like a sunburn you forget to notice because the heat is better than the cold. I picked up every job I could. I made coffee at a tiny cafe with broken machines and a manager who thought he was hilarious. I bagged groceries at a store where the fluorescent lights made everyone look tired. I babysat for a woman in Westwood who paid cash and left passive-aggressive notes on the fridge. It wasn't glamorous, but it was money. Some nights, I'd get back to the dorm so tired I didn't even change out of my uniform. I'd lie on the mattress staring at the ceiling, my back aching, my hands stained with espresso and plastic wrap, and I'd wonder if it was all worth it. But then I'd remember what it felt like to sit at that engagement dinner, the way the ring box looked like a trap disguised as luxury, and I'd know I wasn't going back. I didn't have a family anymore. Not in the way people mean when they talk about Sunday dinners and holiday plans. But I had something else now. I had my name on an acceptance letter. I had a job. I had a friend who picked up the phone at midnight. I had a future that didn't belong to anyone else. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. It was a Tuesday, the kind that crawled into your bones and stayed there, already warm by 8 in the morning and dragging me into the shop with barely enough energy to fake a smile. My uniform shirt smelled like burnt espresso, and the polyester apron strap was digging into the back of my neck, but I didn't have time to fix it. There was a line out the door, the espresso machine was leaking again, and the new girl had just called out sick, leaving me alone behind the counter with a half-dead register and a manager who thought microwaving fish in the break room was an acceptable lifestyle choice. I was 2 steps from a breakdown and 3 orders behind when she walked in. Ella Griffin didn't look like much at first glance. No loud designer bag or overcompensating heels, just a pressed blouse, clean lines, and a calm expression that didn't match the chaos around her. She ordered a black coffee, simple and quick, but when I reached for the cup and fumbled it, sloshing hot liquid across the counter and onto my hand, I muttered an apology without meeting her eyes. "Rough morning?" she asked, not with that smug customer tone that usually followed the question, but with something real, something that made me look up. I gave a tired laugh and told her it had been a rough month. Maybe a rough year. She didn't rush away like most people did when the barista spoke too honestly. She stood there, coffee in hand, watching me restock the pastries with my burned hand tucked behind my back like it didn't hurt. Then she asked something no one had asked me in a long time. "What's your story?" I paused, just stared at her. People didn't want baristas to have stories. They wanted us to be hands, not hearts. I don't know why I answered. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the way she looked at me like I was someone worth hearing. I told her I was a student, that I'd been on my own since last fall, that I worked 3 jobs to keep my head above water. I told her I didn't know where I was going yet, just that it would be somewhere better than where I started. She nodded, not sympathetically, but thoughtfully, like she was fitting pieces together. Then she handed me her business card. I remember the weight of it. Thick, matte paper, real ink, embossed letters. Ella Griffin, Marketing Director, Nora and Gray. "We're hiring a junior assistant," she said. "Nothing glamorous, but you seem like someone who doesn't scare easy. If you're interested, come by." And just like that, she left. I stood there for a good 2 minutes staring at the card. Nora and Gray wasn't just a company. It was a name I'd seen in magazines, a firm that handled branding for companies you see on billboards and city buses. I didn't even have a real resume, just a list of coffee shops and grocery store shifts and babysitting jobs that made me sound like I was auditioning for a survival show. But I went home that night, pulled out my laptop, and wrote the best damn resume I could with what I had. I wore my only button-down to the interview, one of the ones my mom had bought years ago for polished school events, the tag still on. I walked into that office with sweaty palms and a heart that felt like it might jump out of my chest. Ella met me in the lobby, smiled, and introduced me to the team like I belonged there. The job wasn't glamorous, just like she said. I fetched coffee, organized files, scheduled meetings. But I learned. Every day, I soaked up everything I could. How to write emails that made people answer, how to spot a pitch that worked, how to hold your ground when a room full of people didn't expect you to speak. And somehow, for the first time in a long time, I started to feel like maybe I wasn't just surviving. Maybe I was actually building something. Something real. Something mine. I didn't build an empire out of ambition. I built it out of survival, stubbornness, and the kind of raw desperation that comes from being told you don't belong anywhere unless you're wearing someone else's name. When I started at Nora & Gray, I didn't know the first thing about marketing strategy, brand architecture, or client negotiations. I just knew how to listen, how to adapt, how to stay up late and wake up early, how to keep moving even when my feet ached and my eyes burned. Ella saw that in me before I did. She gave me space, then gave me responsibility, then gave me challenges I had no business taking on, except I did. I took them, tore them apart, and made them mine. While my classmates slept off parties or complained about lecture halls, I worked double shifts and snuck into night courses on digital marketing, analytics, and business law. I took notes in the margins of coffee receipts and watched lectures with earbuds and during my lunch break. I missed birthdays, gave up weekends, and lived off cheap takeout and campus vending machines. I didn't have balance, but I had momentum, and for the first time, it was pulling me forward instead of dragging me down. Within 3 years at Nora & Gray, I wasn't just the assistant anymore. I was pitching to clients, developing full-scale brand revamps, running teams. People started noticing, not just inside the company, but outside. I was the youngest in every room, the one who didn't come from legacy, the one who didn't have a last name that opened doors. And yet, I kept getting results that made people shut up and listen. Eventually, it got to the point where I knew I had outgrown the place. Not because I didn't love it, but because I had more to give. More vision, more edge, more hunger. Mason Media started in a co-working space with bad lighting and a cracked whiteboard. I used my last paycheck from Nora & Gray to buy a refurbished laptop and a domain name. I built the site myself, stayed up till 3 a.m. writing case studies and cold emails, and creating mock campaigns that I pushed across every platform I could afford. I took small clients no one else wanted, the ones with impossible budgets and unrealistic expectations, and turned them into stories that sold. Word spread. The calls started coming in. Within 2 years, we had offices in 3 cities. By year 4, we were national. I hired scrappy kids who reminded me of me, ones with community college degrees and night jobs and no patience for corporate fluff. We were fast, smart, fearless. Mason Media wasn't just a business. It was a signal that you didn't have to come from money or connections to make something unstoppable, that you could rewrite the whole damn playbook if you were willing to bleed for every page. It was at a green business conference in Seattle that I met him, Alex Reynolds, founder of TerraLux, a chain of eco-conscious lifestyle stores that were blowing up across the West Coast. We were both panelists on a sustainability and branding discussion, which I thought would be a snooze fest until he started talking. He didn't just know his numbers. He knew how to tell a story with them. He spoke with this calm confidence, not the kind that dominates a room, but the kind that anchors it. After the panel, he came up to me and said, "I've been following your agency's work for a while now. You've got teeth." I laughed, called him out for the weird compliment, and we ended up grabbing coffee, then lunch, then a second meeting that turned into a campaign collaboration, then a series of late-night calls where business plans blurred into life stories. It wasn't fast or fiery. It was steady, earned, honest. Eventually, we partnered officially. His vision, my execution. Our brands lifted each other. People noticed. And somewhere in between launching 3 national campaigns and arguing over font choices at 1 a.m., we built something that wasn't just strategic. It was personal. I never thought I'd have space in my life for both career and connection. I never thought I'd let someone in that close. But Alex never tried to take anything from me. He just stood beside me, ready to build too. I used to think success would feel like revenge. That one day I'd look at everything I'd created and laugh at the people who left me behind. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels like standing on a rooftop in a city I once dreamed of escaping to, watching my name light up on a building and realizing I'm not running anymore. I'm home, because I built it, brick by brick, day by day, on my terms. I found out I was pregnant in the middle of Q3, right after we'd landed a multi-million-dollar campaign with a global tech firm, and just days before I was scheduled to fly to New York for back-to-back pitch meetings. At first, I thought the nausea was stress, too many all-nighters and lukewarm matchas, but when the second test showed the same result as the first, everything around me went still. I sat on the edge of my bathroom tub, holding that tiny stick like it was a detonator, and for a moment, all the old panic came rushing back. What if I couldn't do this? What if this was the beginning of the end? What if everything I'd built came crashing down the second I paused to catch my breath? I didn't know how to tell Alex. Not because I thought he'd be angry, but because I'd never seen myself as a mother. Not in the world I grew up in, not in the mirror of my mother's voice. I had always seen motherhood as something sharp, something conditional, something you had to survive. But when I finally told him, hands trembling, voice quiet, he didn't flinch. He reached across the kitchen table, took my hand in his, and said, "Then we'll figure it out. Together." We didn't announce it right away. There were too many moving parts, hires, expansions, deadlines, and I still hadn't wrapped my head around the idea that my body was now a part of someone else's story. But over time, it started to sink in. At night, I'd sit on the couch with Alex, his head resting against my shoulder, one hand absently tracing circles on my stomach, and I'd let myself imagine a life that didn't feel like a trap. A life where family wasn't a performance, but a choice. Julia was born in the middle of a storm, literally. It was late October, and the city had lost power in half the neighborhoods from downed transformers. I labored for 13 hours with the rhythm of rain tapping against the windows and the buzz of backup generators humming through the hospital walls. She came out screaming, fists clenched, full of fire. When they placed her in my arms, something in me cracked open in a way I didn't know I could still feel. Like every scar, every closed door, every night spent wondering if I'd ever be enough had suddenly found its answer in 8 pounds of raw, wrinkled defiance. Motherhood didn't soften me. It sharpened me. It made every decision mean more, every risk feel heavier. I returned to the office sooner than I should have, breast pump in one hand, quarterly reports in the other, trying to find balance in a world that rarely offers it to women. I set up a nursery across from my office, hired a nanny who became family, and restructured the company's parental leave policies so no one else would have to choose between ambition and love the way I had feared I might. There were days when I felt split down the middle, CEO by daylight, mother by moonlight. But the truth is, those roles weren't opposites. They fed each other. Every lullaby made me more patient in boardrooms. Every sleepless night gave me clarity about what actually mattered. I'd take meetings with Julia napping in a sling against my chest, answer emails with one hand while rocking her bassinet with the other, and I didn't care what it looked like. I had already spent too much of my life trying to be palatable. Now, I was simply being. Alex was everything my father wasn't. Present, calm, unafraid of softness. He changed diapers, made bottles, memorized the pediatrician's number, and never once asked me to shrink. He told me he loved the way Julia gripped his finger like she owned the world. He told me he hoped she'd inherit my fire, not just his calm. And when I doubted myself, when the weight of it all felt like too much, he reminded me of everything I'd already survived. We built something real. Not perfect, but real. A family not built on rules or obedience, but on choice and respect. And every time I looked at Julia's eyes, wide and steady, just like mine, I knew I was raising a girl who would never be told to sit quietly while someone else decided her future. She would never have to run away to find her voice. She would grow up surrounded by it. And she would know, always, that her mother built an empire not in spite of her, but for her. It had been 11 years since I left Georgetown with a backpack and a heartbeat full of defiance, and I hadn't looked back once. Not when I opened the first office of Mason Media. Not when Julia took her first steps. Not even when reporters started calling me the next generation's branding architect. I had trained myself to see the past as a closed door, sealed and bolted, a chapter that belonged to a different version of me, one that I had no intention of revisiting. But the past, I've learned, doesn't knock. It just walks right in when it feels like it. The email was short. Just a line from an old family friend, a name I hadn't seen in over a decade, tucked between client updates and board meeting invites. Your father made it through surgery. He asked about you. That was it. No mention of Veronica. No plea. Just a thread of information, dangled loosely like it didn't have the weight to change anything. But it did. For days, I didn't respond. I let the email sit in my inbox, unread, while I tried to carry on like usual. But something shifted. Julia started asking more questions, not about boardrooms or brand launches, but about family. About my family. Do I have another grandma? She asked one morning over oatmeal, swinging her feet under the kitchen stool like the world wasn't tilting. Where does your daddy live? The questions were small, innocent, but they landed like bruises. And I didn't have good answers. Only silences I'd never learned how to fill. I talked to Alex about it late one night, after Julia had gone to bed, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm like armor. He didn't push me. He never did. Just listened, nodded, and said, "If you think she needs to know them, then maybe it's time." I hated how much sense that made. I hated how much I had already decided before he even said it. The drive back to Georgetown felt like peeling off old skin. Every mile brought memories I had long buried under ambition and distance. I hadn't been back since the night my mother slapped me on the porch and told me I was no daughter of hers. I didn't know what I'd find. I didn't even know if they'd open the door. But when we pulled into that familiar street, everything looked smaller, less like a throne, more like a stage that had lost its script. My father answered the door. Older, grayer, thinner, but his eyes were the same. Quiet. Watching. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't hug him. I just stepped aside and let Julia walk forward, her curls bouncing, her voice bright as she said, "Hi, I'm Julia." He crouched, slow and careful, and took her hand. "I'm Thomas," he said. And just like that, a bridge I never thought would be built began to form, one word, one gesture at a time. Inside, the house hadn't changed much. The same scent of lemon polish and something faintly floral. The same framed photos on the walls, though some were missing. No sign of the engagement dinner photo. No trace of Veronica in the downstairs hallway. I didn't ask. He didn't explain. We talked like people afraid of too much truth, keeping to the shallow end of things. He asked about my work, about Alex, about Julia's school. I gave answers. Polite ones. Measured. But Julia ran through the house like it was a playground, asking about everything, poking into rooms I hadn't seen in years, pulling the silence apart like old wallpaper. Eventually, I sat on the porch steps, the same ones where I had once been banished, and watched my daughter chase butterflies in the backyard. My father sat beside me. We didn't say much at first. Then he cleared his throat and said, "You were right to leave." I didn't look at him. I just stared straight ahead. "I didn't know how to protect you from her. I'm sorry for that." It was the closest thing to an apology I had ever gotten. I didn't forgive him. Not in that moment. But I didn't get up and leave either. Sometimes healing doesn't come with closure. Sometimes it comes in fragments. A child's laughter echoing down an old hallway. A grandfather learning how to hold space instead of control. A daughter daring to return not to reclaim the past, but to give her own child the truth of it. Julia sat in my lap later that evening, her head resting against my chest, and whispered, "I like this place. It feels quiet." And for the first time in a long time, that didn't feel like a threat. It felt like peace. Maybe not complete, but enough. Enough to stay for dinner. Enough to come back again. Enough to finally breathe. I hadn't planned on arriving in Georgetown the way I did, but the schedule was tight and Julia had a school project due Monday. So when the pilot opened the door of the jet and the sun hit the tarmac, I stepped down with my daughter's hand in mine, heels clicking against the steps, wind tugging at my coat like it still remembered who I used to be. The car ride through town was short, familiar landmarks sliding by like old photographs. Places that once made my chest clench now felt like distant echoes, as if they belonged to someone else's life. When we pulled up to the house, nothing had changed. The white shutters, the manicured lawn, the wreath on the door that looked like it had been swapped out by seasonal reflex. It was all exactly the same, down to the smell of cut grass and polished brass, as if time had folded over and dropped me back into a version of myself I had buried years ago. I could feel Julia watching me from the back seat, her eyes curious but calm. I took a breath, nodded to the driver, and walked up the front steps like I'd never left. The door opened before I could knock. My father stood there, thinner, older, but still composed, still cloaked in the same soft deference that had once made him a ghost in his own house. His eyes widened when he saw me, then shifted to Julia, then back to me again. He didn't speak right away, just stepped aside and said, "Come in," like the words had been waiting for years and finally found the air to carry them. Inside, the air hit me like a memory. The same furniture, same layout, same smell of clean wood and lavender. My shoes clicked against the hardwood as I stepped into the foyer. Julia slipped her hand from mine and wandered ahead, her voice echoing lightly as she asked about the paintings on the wall, her curiosity unfiltered. My father led us toward the sitting room, the same space that once held tea parties, scoldings, and forced piano recitals. I noticed the crystal vase on the mantel, still full of artificial lilies, and wondered how many times my mother had dusted it in the past 11 years. And then she appeared. Veronica, my mother. Same posture, same meticulous bun, same measured silence. She stopped at the edge of the room like a sculpture, eyes scanning me with something unreadable, shock, pride, pain. I couldn't tell. Her gaze drifted down to Julia, who was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, flipping through a magazine on the coffee table. Without a word, my mother turned, disappeared into the kitchen, and came back with a glass of juice, which she handed to Julia without a smile, but without hesitation. She didn't speak to me. She didn't need to. The gesture said enough. It was the closest she'd come to an apology. I walked slowly through the hall toward the staircase, my feet finding muscle memory in every creak of the floorboards. My father said nothing, but I could feel him behind me, watching, not pushing. When I reached the top, I hesitated outside my old room, hand hovering over the doorknob like it might burn me. Then I opened it. It was untouched. The same lilac walls. The same posters. My books, arranged alphabetically, the spine of my sketchbook peeking from under a stack of old notebooks. My comforter, slightly faded now, but still perfectly folded, corners tucked just the way I used to like it. On the dresser, next to a cracked jewelry box, was something that made me stop, a manila folder. Inside were clippings, magazine articles, printed interviews, photos from conferences, even screenshots from business profiles. Every press mention, every milestone. My name, over and over, in her handwriting. She had been keeping track. All these years, while I built a life she never approved of, she had been watching. Quietly, distantly. Like a gardener who plants seeds in the wrong season and checks every morning anyway. I sat on the edge of the bed. The same bed she'd told me to make every morning, the one I had cried into the night she banished me. And I felt something break. Not in anger, not in forgiveness, just in truth. Maybe she never stopped being my mother. Maybe she just didn't know how to do it right. Julia peeked in from the hallway, juice in hand, and asked, "Is this your room, Mom?" I nodded. It used to be. She looked around like she was studying a time capsule, then smiled and said, "It's pretty." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to correct her. I didn't have to explain what was missing or what had hurt. I just reached for her hand and said, "Yeah, it was." The table was cleared, the plates stacked neatly in the sink by my father, the leftover roast covered and slid into the fridge by hands that had once never lifted more than a paperweight. And Julia was upstairs with a bedtime story and the faint sound of her voice singing to herself through the old baby monitor they'd pulled out of storage. My mother sat rigid in her armchair, back straight, lips tight, pretending to read a magazine she hadn't turned a page of in 20 minutes. My father sat across from me in the den, eyes soft, unsure. The air between us felt thin, like a thread pulled taut between too many years of silence. I looked at both of them and didn't wait for them to speak. I had rehearsed this in my head for too long. "Before this goes any further," I said, keeping my tone calm but unwavering, "we need to be clear on a few things." My father sat up straighter. My mother's eyes lifted, barely. Julia is not here to fix the past. She is not here to fulfill an image or to impress anyone. She will grow up with choices, her own, not dictated by legacy, not shaped by expectation. If you want a relationship with her, it has to come without strings. I let that sink in, watched their faces, the flickers of understanding and resistance. Then I continued, "Alex is not a footnote. He is my equal in every way. We built our life together. He's not some accessory to tolerate because he doesn't come from your world. He is my partner, my anchor. You treat him with anything less than respect, and you won't see any of us again." My voice didn't shake. Not once. My father nodded slowly, his jaw clenched, and I could see something shifting in his posture. Less pride, more reckoning. I pulled a slim folder from my bag and placed it on the table between us. "This," I said, tapping it once, "is a business proposal, not a charity plea. Your company has potential, but it's stalled. Mason Media can help rebrand it for the modern market, not out of pity, not because I owe you, but because this could be mutually beneficial. If you're interested, we move forward. If not, that's your call. But don't mistake my visit for nostalgia. I'm here on my terms." He picked up the folder with the careful reverence of someone handling something alive. He didn't open it, just held it in his lap for a long time. Then he said, barely above a whisper, "I should have stood up for you. Back then." His hands tightened around the folder. I wasn't strong enough. I let her dictate everything, and I told myself I was keeping peace, but the truth is I was just afraid. "And I'm sorry. Truly." I nodded once, the apology landing somewhere deeper than I expected. I didn't offer forgiveness, not yet. But I didn't walk out either. That, I think, said enough. It was months later, after Julia's first solo visit, after Alex came down for the holidays, after my father signed the proposal and let our team take over the branding rebuild, that my mother found me alone on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the dusk settle over the garden. She didn't sit, just stood near the rail, like she couldn't quite bring herself to close the distance. Her voice was quiet, almost brittle. "You always reminded me of my mother," she said. "Too loud. too ambitious, too unafraid. And I didn't know what to do with that. I thought, if I could shape you into something easier, something acceptable, you'd be safe. Respected. I thought I was protecting you. She swallowed, looked down. But I see now backslash. I was protecting myself. From my own regrets. From watching you become everything I was too afraid to be. She finally looked at me, and there was no steel left in her. Just an older woman standing in front of her grown daughter, stripped of pride, of image, of everything that had kept us apart. I was wrong, she said. So wrong. And for the first time in my life, I believed her. The sun filtered through the trees in golden stripes as laughter spilled across the park, high and bright, carried on the spring breeze like music. Julia was running in circles with her friends, a glittery crown slipping sideways on her curls, her cheeks flushed with the kind of joy that lives only in childhood. The picnic tables were strung with pastel streamers. The cake sat untouched for now, a towering creation of strawberries and cream, and bubble wands scattered across the grass like tiny wands of magic. And in the middle of it all, watching from a shaded bench with paper cups in hand, and that tentative, late-learned affection in their movements, sat my mother and father. Now, simply Grandma and Grandpa. They had shown up early, helped string balloons, packed extra snacks in a cooler the way my mother never did when I was a child. My father carried folding chairs. My mother helped Julia with her shoelaces. And when I saw them helping set up without giving orders, without trying to control anything, just existing quietly in this life we had rebuilt, it struck me again just how far we'd come. I stood near Alex, one arm looped through his, the other holding a plate of half-eaten fruit, and I watched the scene like it wasn't mine. Like it belonged to someone who had earned it more gracefully. Someone who hadn't had to fight tooth and nail to unlearn the things she was raised to believe. But it was mine. All of it. The calm, the messiness, the laughter, the softness. The second chance. I used to think success would taste like power, like silence after applause, or the hush of a private jet cabin cutting across time zones. And it did for a while. But this, watching my daughter dance barefoot in the grass, seeing my parents trying, really trying, to be the kind of people she needed, not the kind they used to be. This was the victory I never dared to dream of. Because the truth is, I didn't just break a cycle. I replaced it. I didn't just walk away from the version of myself they tried to shape. I raised a child who will never have to break herself just to be seen. Julia will grow up with a choice. She will grow up with love that doesn't come with conditions, with boundaries that aren't built from fear, with a family stitched together not by blood alone, but by accountability, by growth, by the hard, slow work of healing. And maybe that's what all of this was about. Not the money, not the press, not the empire, but about becoming the kind of mother I never had. And still, somehow, learning to forgive the one I did. But that's just my story. What about you? What does healing look like in your life? What's the one cycle you've broken, or still want to break? And when you think about what success really means to you, is it still the same as it was years ago? Or did it change, like mine did, in the quiet moments, in the unplanned ones, in the ones that don't go viral but live forever anyway? I want to hear from you. Tell me what it looks like, your version of freedom, of rebuilding, of finally becoming.